There's a smell to my studio. It's not perfume. It's not food. It's history. It's the sharp, clean scent of mineral spirits, the earthy smell of old canvas, and the faint, sweet aroma of linseed oil. For me, that's the smell of home. It's the smell of truth. My name is Chloe, and I'm an art restorer. Most days, my entire world is a few square inches of a painting, a world I enter with a cotton swab and a single hair brush. It's a quiet life, a meticulous life. It's a life where I find the stories hidden under layers of dirt and time. It's this weird, quiet magic. And if you have a passion like that, something you just pour your soul into, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. And hey, while you're down there, hitting that like button really helps more people find these stories. My workshop is buried in the basement of one of New York's grandest museums, a place most visitors never see. It's my sanctuary. Fluorescent lights hum over stainless steel tables, and the air is still and focused. While upstairs, people mill about, taking selfies and talking in hushed tones. Down here, I'm having a conversation with someone who's been dead for 300 years. That day, I was working on a Dutch portrait from the 17th century. A woman with a lace collar so fine it looked like spun moonlight. But over the centuries, a clumsy restorer had coated her in a thick, yellowing varnish, turning her pale skin to a jaundiced gold. My job wasn't to change her, but to reveal her. To peel back the ugly, disfiguring layer that someone else had put there and show the world who she was meant to be. It's delicate work. You press too hard, you use the wrong solvent. And the original truth is gone forever. You have to be patient. You have to listen to the painting. It tells you what it needs. My father taught me that. He wasn't a restorer. He was a collector. Not a rich one, just a passionate one. Our house wasn't fancy, but every wall told a story. He'd buy forgotten pieces at dusty estate sales, convinced there was a masterpiece hiding under the grime. Sometimes he was right. Most times he wasn't, but he loved the hunt. He taught me to see, really see. Not just the big picture, but the tiny details. The way an artist signed their name, the specific weave of the canvas, the way a brushstroke catches the light. The truth is always there, Chloe, he'd say, tapping his finger on a canvas. You just have to be willing to look for it. He died when I was 19. A sudden heart attack that felt like the world had cracked in half. And in the aftershock, my world did crack. My stepmother, Eleanor, the woman he married just a few years before, didn't waste much time. The paintings were the first to go. Then the house. Then me. It wasn't a dramatic, screaming fight. It was cold. It was quiet. It was the closing of a door. I was a loose end from her husband's previous life, a reminder of a past she wanted to erase. So she did. I ended up in a tiny apartment in Queens with a couple of boxes and a hole in my chest the size of a missing father. I put myself through school, got my degrees in art history and chemistry, and landed the job at the museum. It was underpaid, underfunded, and hidden in a basement, but it was mine. I was surrounded by truth. And for a long time, that was enough. Until the night I saw her face again. I was scrolling through my phone after a long day, my fingers smelling of turpentine, when an article popped up. Vance Foundation Gala to feature Lost Masterpiece. And there she was, Eleanor Vance, my stepmother. Pose, smiling, her arm linked with some city councilmen. She looked exactly the same, impeccably dressed, her blonde hair coiffed into a helmet of social perfection. The article gushed about her philanthropic work, her tireless efforts to support the city's cultural institutions. The Vance Foundation. Her foundation was hosting its annual gala, the biggest event of the social season. And the centerpiece, the main attraction, was a newly discovered painting by a famous impressionist, a lost treasure, they called it. The article said it was from the personal collection of her late husband, my father. My heart went cold. I zoomed in on the picture of the painting. It was a landscape, full of soft, dappled light, a river snaking through a green field. It was beautiful. But as I looked closer, at the signature in the bottom right corner, a tiny, almost invisible knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I knew this artist's work. I'd studied him for an entire semester. I'd seen dozens of his paintings, his sketches, his letters. I knew his signature like I knew my own. And something about this one, it felt wrong. The loop of the L, the sharp downstroke of the T, it was almost perfect. Almost, but it felt rehearsed. It didn't have the fluid, confident flick of a man signing his name for the 1,000th time. It felt like a careful copy, like a lie. It was probably nothing, a trick of the low-resolution photo, the angle of the camera. But I couldn't shake it. That feeling my dad had taught me to trust. The feeling that something was hiding, right there in plain sight, just beneath the glossy surface. A few days later, I was at a small art auction in Chelsea. I rarely went. To these things. I couldn't afford anything, and the atmosphere could be so pretentious. But this one had a few minor sketches from an artist I was researching for the museum, and I wanted to see them in person. I was standing in the back, nursing a glass of cheap white wine, when a man came and stood next to me. He really knew how to use charcoal, didn't he? The man said, his voice quiet, nodding toward a sketch on the wall. Most people think of it as a blunt instrument, but he could make it sing. I turned. He was handsome in an understated way, with kind eyes and a thoughtful expression. He wasn't wearing a flashy suit or a Rolex. He looked normal, like he was here for the art, not the schmoozing. He let the texture of the paper do half the work, I replied, surprised by how easily the words came. He wasn't fighting it. He was collaborating with it. His eyes lit up. Exactly. That's it exactly. We spent the next hour talking, not about our jobs, or where we lived, or who we knew. We talked about art, about the way a certain pigment fades over time, about the quiet rivalry between Matisse and Picasso, about the pure joy of discovering an artist you've never heard of. His name was James. He was smart, funny, and he listened. He really listened. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was seeing the real me, not the low-level museum grunt or the orphan stepdaughter. He saw Chloe, the person who believed art was a conversation. As I was leaving, he asked for my number. He said he'd love to get coffee and pick my brain about restoration. I gave it to him, my hand shaking just a little. Walking home. Through the crowded New York streets, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close. A tiny crack of light in my quiet gray world. But even then, in the back of my mind, the image of that painting lingered. The beautiful landscape with the signature that felt like a whisper of a lie. I didn't know it then, but these two things the man in the painting were about to collide and change my life forever. My quiet, meticulous world was about to get very, very loud. A week later, an envelope arrived at my apartment. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind that feels important before you even open it. My address was written in elegant, looping calligraphy. There was no return address, but I knew who it was from before I saw the seal on the back. The Vance Foundation. Inside was a formal invitation to the gala. The board of the Vance Foundation requests the pleasure of your company. It was cold and personal. A courtesy, nothing more. A way for Eleanor to tick a box, to say she'd done her duty by her late husband's forgotten daughter. My first instinct was to tear it up, to throw it in the trash with the junk mail and the pizza flyers. What was I going to do there? Stand in a corner and watch Eleanor play the grand dame of New York society? Watch her parade a painting that she claimed was my father's, a painting that my gut told me was a fraud. But then I looked at the invitation again. An opportunity. Not for a family reunion. Not for closure. An opportunity for the truth. This wasn't about feelings anymore. This was professional. I was a trained expert in authenticating art. If there was a lie hanging on that wall, I had a duty to find it. My father had taught me to look for the truth. And for the first time, I felt like I had a way to do it. I decided I would go. Not as Chloe Sterling, the grieving daughter, but as Chloe Sterling, the art restorer. I would be a scientist entering a lab. My mission, to get close to that painting. My coffee date with James was 2 days later. We met at a little place in the West Village with worn wooden tables and the best espresso in the city. He was even better in broad daylight. He had this calm, focused energy that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He remembered every little thing I'd said at the auction and asked smart, insightful questions about my work. So, he said, stirring his macchiato, if you suspected a painting was a forgery, I mean purely hypothetically, what's the first thing you'd look for? It was the perfect opening. I decided to play it cool, to frame it as a professional puzzle. Well, it depends on the artist, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Let's say, for example, a French impressionist from the late 19th century. He leaned forward, intrigued. Okay, go on. Most forgers are brilliant mimics, I explained, feeling my professional confidence take over. They can copy the brushstrokes, the color palette, the style. They get the surface right. But they almost always miss the things under the surface. The foundation of the painting. Like what? Like the canvas primer, I said. The words come in faster now. This particular artist, I said, careful not to name him, he had a very specific, almost unique way of priming his canvases. He used a double ground method with a chalk-based gesso and a final layer tinted with a tiny bit of lead white and raw umber. It gave his paintings this incredible luminosity from beneath. But it's a detail you would only know if you'd studied his work on a chemical level. It's not in the popular art books. James just stared at me for a second, a strange look on his face. Not confusion, recognition. The Lefebvre method, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He wrote about it in a letter to his brother in 1888. Most people think the letter was lost. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. My heart hammered against my ribs. How could he possibly know that? The Lefebvre letter was an obscure piece of academic trivia, something only a handful of art historians and conservation specialists in the world would know about. It wasn't something a casual art lover would just know. How did you know that? I asked, my voice tight. He just smiled, a small, enigmatic smile. I'm a bit of a nerd about this stuff. I do a lot of reading. He changed the subject then, steering the conversation back to safer ground, but the moment hung in the air between us. He was more than he was letting on. Much more. But as I left the coffee shop, one thought screamed in my mind, drowning out everything else. The primer, that was it. That was the key. If the painting at the gala didn't have that specific luminous underlayer, it was a fake. I had my test. Now I just needed to get to the specimen. My chance came a few days before the gala. Eleanor hosted a smaller, more exclusive reception for major donors at her Park Avenue apartment. It was a pre-gala thank you, a way to prime the pumps of the city's wealthiest wallets. The invitation, I was sure, had been an oversight, a mistake by her social secretary, but I didn't care. I put on the one good black dress I owned, pulled my hair back into a severe professional bun, and walked into the lion's den. The apartment was exactly as I remembered it, only more so. It was a sterile beige box of wealth, decorated not with things that were loved, but with things that were expensive. People stood in small, tight circles, sipping champagne and talking, in low, important-sounding voices. And there, on the main wall of the living room, illuminated by two perfectly aimed spotlights, was the painting. It was even more beautiful in person. The colors were vibrant. The light almost seemed to move across the canvas. For a second, my theory felt foolish, a product of my own resentment. But then I saw Eleanor gliding toward me, her smile as thin and sharp as a shard of glass. Her daughter, Isabel, my stepsister, trailed in her wake like a Gucci-clad shadow. Isabel had inherited her mother's sense of style and none of her subtlety. "Chloe, what a surprise," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with manufactured warmth. She kissed the air next to my cheek. "I'm so glad you could make it." Isabel just looked me up and down, her eyes lingering for a half-second too long on my 3-year-old dress. "Nice of you to come up from Queens," she said, making the borough sound like a terminal diagnosis. "Eleanor." "Isabel," I said, keeping my own voice neutral, professional. I turned my attention to the small group of people standing with them. Eleanor did the introductions, and the tone she used told them everything they needed to know about me. "This is Chloe, my late husband's daughter. She works in the basement at the museum." The words hung there, defining me. Not a restorer, not a professional, a basement employee. The message was clear. She is not one of us. I ignored it. I had a mission. I turned my gaze to the painting. "It's a remarkable piece," I said, directing my comment to Eleanor but making sure the donors could hear. "The provenance is fascinating. I'd love to get a closer look, if you don't mind." "For the museum's records, of course." A flicker of something panic, fear, crossed Eleanor's face before she masked it with a brittle smile. "Oh, I don't think so, dear," she said, her voice dropping into a patronizing coo. "It's far too delicate. The insurance people would have a fit. You understand?" She put a hand on my arm, a gesture that looked supportive but felt like a warning, a dismissal. She was refusing. She was actively preventing a professional from examining a piece of art she was about to auction for charity. An innocent person would have been proud to show it off, to have its authenticity confirmed by an expert. But Eleanor wasn't innocent. In that moment, with her cold hand on my arm and the light shining on the wall behind her, my suspicion hardened into certainty. The painting was a fake, and my stepmother knew it. The gala was in 2 days. Time was running out. Eleanor's refusal to let me near the painting was practically a confession, but it wasn't proof. A gut feeling doesn't stand up in the court of public opinion, especially when you're a basement employee from Queens, and the accused is the queen of Park Avenue philanthropy. I needed evidence, hard, scientific, undeniable proof. I spent a frantic day calling in favors. My boss at the museum owed me for the time I'd spent all weekend restoring a painting that a clumsy donor had knocked over. I told him I needed to do a final authentication check on a piece being loaned to the museum after the Vance Gala. It was a white lie, a bending of the rules, but my conscience didn't even flinch. He made a call. He told me the painting was being held at a high-end, climate-controlled art storage facility in Long Island City until the night of the event. He arranged for me to have 30 minutes of access. The next morning, I walked into the facility. My museum ID clipped to my jacket, a large leather satchel over my shoulder. The place was like a fortress for art, silent, cold, and sterile. A guard with a face like a block of granite led me down a long white corridor to a private viewing room. He placed the painting on a large easel, tapped his watch, and said, 30 minutes. Then he closed the door, leaving me alone with the lie. My heart was pounding. My hands were sweating. I opened my satchel and took out my tools. Not brushes and solvents this time. I had a digital microscope, a set of magnifying lamps, and the most important piece of equipment, a portable, handheld UV light. Under normal light, the painting was perfect. But under the cool, purple glow of the ultraviolet lamp, the truth began to appear. Art restoration leaves traces that are invisible to the naked eye, but glow like ghosts under UV. I scanned the surface, inch by inch. Everything looked clean, too clean. An authentic 130-year-old painting should have signs of age, tiny repairs, the faint patina of time. This one was pristine. Then I focused the light on the signature, and I gasped. It glowed. It glowed a different color from the paint around it. Modern paints and varnishes contain fluorescent agents that older organic pigments don't. Signature was new. It was sitting on top of the final layer of varnish, not under it. It had been added after the painting was finished. The forger had taken an old, worthless landscape by some forgotten artist, cleaned it up, and then simply added the signature of a master. It was a brilliant forgery, but a lazy one. He never expected anyone to look this closely. I took out my phone and documented everything. Close-up photos under normal light, under UV light, through the digital microscope. I recorded the spectral signature of the paint. It was a mountain of evidence. Cold, hard, scientific fact. I had it. I had her. Walking out of that facility and back into the bright sunlight, I felt a surge of triumphant, vengeful energy. My first instinct was to go nuclear, call the art world press, send my evidence to the board of the museum. I imagined the headlines. Socialite Eleanor Vance at center of massive art fraud scandal. I pictured her face crumbling in public. Humiliation as her perfect curated world came crashing down around her. The part of me that was still that 19-year-old girl, kicked out and forgotten, wanted to see her burn. It would be justice. It would be loud, glorious revenge. I went back to my apartment and laid out all my evidence on the floor. I sat there for hours just looking at it. The glowing signature, the spectral analysis printouts, the proof. And as I sat there, the hot fire of my anger began to cool. What would happen if I did that? Yes, Eleanor would be ruined. But the scandal would splash onto the charity, the one my father's name was on. The money raised for sick kids and after-school art programs would be tainted. The museum would be embarrassed. And I would be painted as the bitter, vengeful stepdaughter who took everyone down with her. They would focus on my motives, not my evidence. I'd win, but it would be a messy, ugly victory that destroyed more than it saved. I would be stooping to her level, using chaos and destruction as a weapon. And that's when it hit me. A moment of absolute stunning clarity. My father had taught me to find the truth hidden within the art. He was a builder, a discoverer, not a destroyer. My skill wasn't about blowing things up. It was about careful, precise, quiet revelation. I didn't have to burn her kingdom to the ground. I just had to show everyone that the throne was made of cardboard. I wouldn't expose the villain. I would expose the lie. And I would do it with the same tools I used in my studio. Precision. Knowledge and a truth so undeniable it didn't need to be shouted. It was a strategic shift from a strategy of loud revenge to one of quiet intellectual justice. And in that moment, something just shifted in me. It was like I finally understood what I had to do. If you've ever had a moment of clarity like that, where everything just clicks into place, I hope you'll subscribe and stick around for the rest of the story, because this is where everything changed. There was just one problem. To pull this off, I needed to control the room. I needed credibility. And for that, I needed help. My hand hovered over my phone. I thought of James, the man who knew about the Lefebvre letter, the man who was more than he seemed. It was a huge risk. I was about to confess to bending a dozen rules and accuse one of the city's most powerful women of fraud. He could laugh at me. He could hang up. He could even warn Eleanor. But I trusted my gut. The same gut that had told me the painting was wrong. I dialed his number. "James," I said when he picked up, "I have a strange professional problem I need to run by you. It's about potential art fraud. Major art fraud." I laid it all out. The signature, the UV light, the primer theory, the whole thing. I spoke calmly, professionally, presenting my findings as if I were briefing a colleague at the museum. I left out the part about Eleanor being my stepmother. I kept it clean. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I held my breath. "Chloe," he said finally, his voice serious. "Where are you right now?" "My apartment." "Don't move. I'm sending a car. We need to talk. In person." An hour later, I was sitting in a sleek, minimalist office overlooking Central Park from 60 stories up. James walked in. No longer the casual guy from the coffee shop. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit and an expression of intense focus. "My real name is James Davenport," he said, sitting down across from me. "My family's foundation is the lead donor for the Vance Foundation's charity initiative. We've been anonymously funding their operational costs for 3 years." The air left my lungs. "We've also been quietly tracking a forger who works on the East Coast," he continued, his eyes locked on mine. "Someone who specializes in taking worthless 19th century landscapes and upgrading them with the signatures of masters. His work is brilliant, but he has a tell. He always gets the primer wrong." He let that sink in. He hadn't just been a random guy at an auction. He'd been vetting me, testing me. "I've been waiting for this painting to surface for 6 months," he said. "We knew it was coming up for auction. We just didn't know where. What you did. Gaining access, using the UV, connecting it to the primer. That was brilliant, truly. He wasn't angry that I bent the rules. He was impressed." "So," he said, leaning forward, a genuine smile returning to his face for the first time. "The question isn't whether the painting is a fake. We both know it is. The question is, what do we do about it? My team can handle it quietly. We can pull our funding, notify the authorities, and the Vance Foundation will collapse overnight. Or," he paused, watching me, "we can do it your way. You're the expert here, Chloe. You found the truth under the varnish. How do you want to play it?" He was giving me the lead. He wasn't saving me. He was offering to be my resource. He was handing me the power, not because he was a rich man, but because he respected my mind, my skill, my strategy. In that moment, we weren't a billionaire and a basement employee. We were partners. "I have an idea," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "But I'm going to need your help with the guest list." The night of the gala arrived like a storm cloud of diamonds and champagne. I stood in front of the mirror in my small Queens apartment, looking at a stranger. James had insisted on helping with my wardrobe for the operation, as he called it. A simple, elegant, dark blue dress had arrived in a box that morning. It was understated but cut perfectly. It was a dress that didn't scream for attention, but commanded respect. It was a dress that said, "I belong here." My hair was pulled back, my makeup minimal. I looked like myself, but amplified. I wasn't hiding anymore. A black car, the same one from the day before, was waiting for me downstairs. The ride to the museum where the gala was being held was a blur of city lights. I wasn't nervous. I was calm. The kind of calm you feel before a performance when you know you've done the work, you've rehearsed every line, and you're ready. All the pieces were in place. I walked into the gala alone. The room was a glittering sea of New York's elite. Politicians, tech moguls, old money families. The air buzzed with conversation and the clinking of glasses. At the far end of the hall, on a stage, stood the painting, my painting, The Lie. It was lit like a holy relic, the centerpiece of the entire evening. I saw Eleanor holding court near the stage, a circle of admirers hanging on her every word. She was in her element, radiant in a sequin gown, the queen of her fraudulent kingdom. Our eyes met for a brief second across the crowded room. She gave me a tight, dismissive nod, a gesture that said, "Oh, you actually came." Then she turned away, dismissing me completely. That was fine. I wasn't there for her. My eyes scanned the crowd. James had given me a dossier on 2 key people, my targets. The first was Alastair Finch, the lead art critic for the New York Times. A man whose opinion could make or break an artist's career or a gallery's reputation. He was notoriously hard to impress and had a bloodhound's nose for inauthenticity. The second was a woman named Evelyn Reed, the powerful chair of the acquisitions committee for the Met. She was the gatekeeper of the art world's most prestigious collection. If you wanted to establish a painting's importance, you needed her. Blessing. I found Finch first, standing by himself, looking bored as he swirled a glass of scotch. I walked up to him. "Mr. Finch," I said, Chloe Sterling. I'm a conservator at the museum downtown. I just wanted to say how much I admired your piece on the restoration of the Ghent altarpiece. Your analysis of the Van Eyck brothers' use of layered glazes was spot on. His eyes, which had been glazed over with social fatigue, sharpened with interest. You read that? I didn't just read it, I said. I used it as a reference for a project I'm working on. It's rare to find a critic who understands the chemistry as well as the artistry. For the next 10 minutes, we talked shop. We geeked out over pigment composition and canvas aging. I didn't mention the painting on the stage. I didn't mention Eleanor. I just established my credentials. I showed him, without telling him, that I was a serious professional, a peer. By the time I walked away, he knew who I was. I had planted the first seed. Next, I found Evelyn Reed. She was harder to approach, surrounded by people trying to curry favor. I waited for a lull in the conversation and then moved in. Mrs. Reed, I said, my apologies for interrupting. Chloe Sterling. I believe you know my boss, Dr. Albright. She gave me a polite, searching look. Of course, from the conservation lab. How is he? He's well. He actually had me consult on the pre-acquisition report for that Vermeer you acquired last fall. The analysis of the canvas weave was particularly fascinating. I went on for just a few minutes to discuss a highly specific, technical detail about the painting's underdrawing that had only been revealed through X-ray analysis. It was information only someone who had worked on the report would know. Her eyebrows went up. She was impressed. That was a very thorough report. You have a good eye. Thank you, I said. I learned from the best. My father was a collector. He always said the real story of a painting is never on the surface. I gave her a small, knowing smile and excused myself. The second seed was planted. The two most important voices in the room now knew that I was a credible expert. The time came for the main event, the auction. Everyone took their seats at the round tables filling the grand hall. I found my assigned seat at a table in the back, with a few low-level museum staffers. Invisible. Perfect. Eleanor took the stage, standing next to the auctioneer. She was glowing, soaking in the applause. She gave a soaring speech about my father, about his passion for collecting and his unfailing eye for beauty. She spoke of him as if they'd had a storybook romance, as if she had cherished every part of his life. My stomach turned, but I kept my face a perfect mask of calm. The bidding began. It was fast and furious. 100,000. 200. It climbed past 500,000. The tech moguls were trying to outmuscle the old money families. Eleanor was beaming. Each bid was another brick in the wall of her social triumph. The bidding slowed at $800,000. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Going once. Going twice, ... And that's when I moved. I stood up. In the back of the room, one woman standing was enough to draw a few eyes. I raised my bidding paddle. I have a new bidder, the auctioneer announced, a little surprised. The bid is $850,000. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Who was this woman in the simple blue dress in the back? I saw Eleanor squint, trying to see who had dared to interrupt her moment. When she recognized me, her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. A look of pure annoyance crossed her face. The auctioneer looked at me. Your bid, madam? I lowered my paddle. Before I confirm my bid, I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the perfect acoustics of the hall. I just have a simple question for the esteemed host of this event, Mrs. Vance. Every head in the room turned toward me. Then, as one, they all turned to Eleanor on the stage. I had the floor. I didn't look at her with anger. I looked at her with polite, professional curiosity. I was not an accuser. I was a potential buyer asking for due diligence. Mrs. Vance, I began, my voice calm, respectful, and lethally precise. You spoke so eloquently of your late husband's eye for quality. And as this piece is of such historical and financial importance to the charity, I'm sure you've had the most rigorous authentication performed. So, just for the record, for all the potential buyers in the room, could you please confirm that the painting has undergone spectrographic analysis to authenticate the specific composition of the canvas primer, as is standard procedure for a piece of this alleged importance? Silence. Absolute deafening silence. It was a question that sounded technical, professional, and completely reasonable. To 99% of the people in that room, it was just jargon. But I wasn't talking to them. I was talking to two people, Alistair Finch and Evelyn Reed. I saw Finch lean forward in his seat, his bored expression gone, replaced by one of razor-sharp focus. I saw Evelyn Reed's eyes narrow, a slow nod of understanding on her face. They both knew exactly what I was asking. They knew about the Lefebvre method. They knew that my question was a checkmate. Eleanor froze. Her smile was plastered on her face, a rictus of horror. She was trapped. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. The entire room was staring at her, waiting for an answer. She had two choices, and both were fatal. If she said, "No, we haven't done that test," she would admit to amateurism, to negligence. She would be revealing that her foundation, the one built on her reputation for excellence, had failed to perform the most basic authentication on its star asset. The painting's value would instantly evaporate. The bidding would collapse. She would be a fool. If she said, "Yes, of course we did," she would be telling a verifiable lie. A lie that I, and now Finch and Reed, knew was a lie. A lie that could be exposed with a single phone call to a lab. She would be a fraud. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked desperately at the auctioneer, but he just stared back, his professional poise crumbling. The silence stretched on. It grew from seconds into what felt like an eternity. And in that silence, her entire world imploded. The whispers started. Just a few at first, then more. People leaning toward each other, their eyes wide. They didn't know the technical details, but they knew a kill shot when they saw one. They could smell the blood in the outer. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a single accusation. I hadn't called her a liar or a thief. I had simply asked a question, a quiet, technical question. And with it, I had dismantled her. I hadn't exposed her as a villain. I'd exposed her as something far worse in that room, an amateur, a fraud, a pretender. Her power wasn't in her money. It was in her credibility. And I had just watched it evaporate into thin air under the bright lights of her own stage. Slowly, gracefully, I sat back down. I didn't need to say another word. The implosion was silent, but total. Eleanor stammered something about consulting with her experts and abruptly left the stage. The auctioneer, flustered, quickly moved on to the next item, a trip to Tuscany, but the energy in the room was gone. The magic was broken. People weren't bidding. They were whispering, their eyes darting between my table and the empty space on the stage where Eleanor had been. The gala, her crowning achievement, had curdled into a public relations disaster. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I slipped out of my chair and walked toward the exit, the whispers trailing behind me like the train of a gown. As I reached the marble lobby, James was there, waiting for me by the door. He was holding a coat. My coat. He didn't say, "You did it," or "That was amazing." He just looked at me, a deep and profound respect in his eyes, and said, "I have a car waiting." The ride back to my part of the city was quiet. We watched the glittering lights of Manhattan slide past the window. I didn't feel the euphoric rush of victory I had expected. There was no joy in seeing Eleanor crumble. There was just peace, a profound sense of quiet. The feeling of a weight I didn't even know I was carrying being lifted from my shoulders. It was the feeling of a job well done. I had won, but I had won on my own terms. I had used my mind, my knowledge, my truth. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply revealed what was already there. My team is handling the fallout, James said softly, as if reading my mind. We're in contact with the district attorney's office about the forger. He's the real target here. As for the Vance Foundation, we're structuring a deal to absorb the charity program to make sure the work continues. We'll protect your father's legacy. Eleanor will disappear quietly. No public scandal. She'll just fade away. It was the most elegant solution. Justice without vengeance. A clean, precise excision of the rot, leaving the healthy tissue intact. A few weeks later, my tiny Queens apartment was full of boxes. James was there, helping me tape them up. He wasn't saving me. He wasn't swooping in to rescue the damsel in distress. He was making an investment. I've been looking to fund a new kind of art conservation initiative. He told me a few days after the gala. One that's independent, that focuses on research and new technologies. One that's run by someone with unimpeachable integrity and the best eye in the business. He'd offered me a grant from his foundation. Not a gift, but a partnership. He was providing the capital, but I would provide the vision. I would build it from the ground up. It was a partnership of equals. My new studio was in Soho. It was 3 times the size of my basement lab at the museum, with huge windows that flooded the space with natural light. It smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. I spent months setting it up, hiring a small team of the brightest young conservators I could find, and building the studio I had always dreamed of. We weren't just a repair shop. We were a research facility. We published papers. We developed new techniques. We became the place people went when the truth was hardest to find. My relationship with James grew just as slowly and carefully as one of my restorations. It was built not on grand romantic gestures, but on shared passions and mutual respect. On late nights, debating the merits of a particular artist, and early mornings at the flower market. It was a quiet love, a sturdy love, the kind that's built to last. About a year after the gala, a crate arrived at my studio. It was from James's team. They had tracked down and reacquired one of the last paintings my father had ever bought. One Eleanor had sold off in a rush to erase his memory. It was a small, dark portrait of a woman, covered in a thick layer of grime and yellowed varnish. It was considered worthless. The final scene of this story, the one I play in my head when I think back on it all, isn't the glittering gala or the silent checkmate. It's me, months later, in my own sunlit studio. I'm standing in front of an easel, wearing my white lab coat. On the easel is that portrait, my father's last find. I spent weeks on it. Carefully, patiently, I began to clean away the layers of neglect. I swabbed away the grime, dissolved the ugly varnish, and repaired the cracked canvas. And as the layers came away, something magical happened. Beneath the darkness, a masterpiece began to emerge. The artist wasn't who the auction house had thought. It was the work of a student of Rembrandt, a painter of incredible talent whose work had been lost to history. The woman in the portrait was luminous, her eyes full of life and intelligence. She had been there all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to take the time to see her, to reveal her truth. My hands, steady and sure, moved across the canvas, bringing her back to life. And I realized that this was it. This was the whole story. I wasn't the girl who was saved by a billionaire prince. I was the restorer. I was the one with the skills, the patience, and the knowledge to see the truth beneath the surface. And in saving that painting, I had finally, completely restored myself. Not by seeking revenge, but by creating something beautiful. By building my own legacy, one careful brushstroke at a time. And that's my story. It's about how finding your own truth is the best kind of restoration project. Thanks for listening. If you want more stories about finding strength in unexpected places, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I'll see you in the next one.